Very well done. Thank you. Sassy, I like that word. Yeah, if you put that on my epitaph, I won't be unhappy to call me sassy. Good morning. Yeah, I got the music in me. Wow, that was great. That's a hard act to follow for sure, especially when today I was not planning to be maybe quite as energetic as I sometimes am, because I brought a book that I'm going to read quite a bit out of to you, and I hope it won't be like too dull in terms of the presentation. But this month we're talking about the expectancy of our good, or of good, and how that works and weaves into this idea of a world that works for everyone. And I was here last week when Randy spoke, so I didn't have to watch his video, and I did watch Reverend Bonnie's. So I have a little bit of an idea of how things are moving along here. And as often is the case, I try to, well, I usually am, no matter what, different than some of the other speakers and what my focus is. But today I think it really probably is. Interesting, Barb, I talked to her at the beginning about how the reading is always perfect for what I want to do, even though I never instruct the practitioners nor ask them about what they could do as a reading that would be related to my talk. But negativity was part of what you were reading there. I don't know if I'm going to need these or not, but I brought them in case I do. I don't think I need them. But I want to read this to you about Ernest Holmes' book called This Thing Called Life. Now, this is an old copy. It won't look like this in the bookstore, but I imagine they have it in the bookstore, or if they haven't got it, they can get it for you. This Thing Called Life. So how much of, I don't know how many times, like 5 or 6 times in your reading today was the word life, and about how the music of life sings its song through us, and then the music's in me. I mean, it's just like, how perfect can it get? It's all in divine order, and it's amazing how if we just show up and let it flow, God works its way through us, right? No question about it. So Bonnie, as often is the case, talked a little bit about just the semantics of things and the basics of terminology and how these things show up. Randy talked about how we get to the point of seeing our good, or having our good show up, and seeing the good in the world through forgiveness and compassion. And today I want to talk a little bit about this idea of negative thoughts and how to transform them and how to move through this into a world that works for everyone through us individually. I don't believe that we can do much in the world except what we can change within ourselves, because it comes here first, starts here first. So I'm always talking about the inside-out job and the personal, and how then it's connected to the planetary. So here's the question that, excuse me, this is chapter 8, of This Thing Called Life by Ernest Holmes. Here's a question that Ernest puts to us, and I wasn't going to read this first line because it didn't seem to make sense, but then when we have I heat up, I cool down, I thought, well, maybe it does make sense. This thing simmers itself down to this. Can we, in the midst of negative conditions, accept our greater good? If we can, we shall be complying with the law of life. We shall be giving life a chance to work for us, and I'll add, and for everyone. It's the world that works for everyone. So suppose you say to yourself, my thoughts are radiant with the light of spirit, and there is no darkness in my mind. I think that the works of Ernest Holmes, I've often felt like we don't really have to have classes or Sunday talks. We could just have book studies. You can open any book by Ernest Holmes and just, you know, what I call the real science of mind method, the very scientific method of what we call the plop method. Just open the book, just let it fall open, however it falls open, and voila, there's something fabulous there for you. And it's certainly the case in my world, in the works of Ernest Holmes, the big book of AA, you know, the Course in Miracles, a number of things that I work in that I find sometimes they rewrote the book last night, and I never saw that before, but excuse me. But it's about our expectancy of good. One of the things I wanted to mention, because I had a couple of questions that came up after I was here last week when they talked about the tithe for the Lake Chapala conference. And today I had a couple of questions. So this is an expectancy of good that is operating for me in my life, and I want to share it with all of you all. The Conference of the Americas will be in Lake Chapala, Jalisco, Mexico, the 19th to the 23rd of June. And someone today asked me, well, who's involved in putting this on, or who plans this, or how does this work? So that part was what I thought maybe I'd share with you, that the Spanish-speaking ministries arm of Home Office of Centers for Spiritual Living International are the people who are involved in that activity of putting on this conference. This will be the fourth year it has come on in some fashion or another, the third year that it's really been a solid conference that was open to anyone to attend. It's a simultaneous translation, bilingual. The cost of the registration, including 4 nights in the hotel and 2 meals almost every day, is less than $300 US. And so all you got to do is get yourself to Guadalajara if you want to come to the conference in July. And by the way, the weather there will be springtime, not hot and muggy like it probably will be here. So if that's another incentive for the idea of leaving to go down there for the conference. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have individually during the meal if you're interested in learning more. But this is an expectancy of our good. Our movement has a goal, aside from the global heart vision, that's sort of like, the thousand points of light kind of thing. We want to have 1 million people involved in the philosophy of science of mind or learning it, not necessarily be part of centers or what have you. But in order for that to happen, we've kind of got to get outside the confines of the U.S. borders. And so now we have centers in Mexico, in Latin America, in Spain, that are all involved in the Spanish-speaking ministries. And interestingly enough, in Latin America, our congregations are much younger than they are in the United States. And that gives me a great expectancy for good, for the continuation of the spreading of this philosophy throughout the world. That's how we get to a world that works for everyone, is for each of us individually to have the benefit of the teachings of the philosophy of science of mind and new thought, metaphysics, whatever name you want to give it. It's fine by me. So Ernest is talking here about how in the midst of negative conditions can we accept our greater good. It's a challenge, isn't it? I mean, I don't imagine I'm the only one that finds that challenging. And to get through there, to get to the world that works for us and works for everyone is our goal. So it's about intending to do this, about setting the intention. And the way I want to talk to you about it today is the first words that came to my mind when I was thinking about this topic for this month was God habits. Good habits, God habits. Because it's the habitual use of the philosophy and the teachings and the development of the consciousness in our minds that formulates the day-to-day habits that causes us to understand and see and have that expectancy of our good in our lives. Excuse me. I'm having a little trouble here. Get my throat cleared. So habits, habits are a part of how we develop our belief system. And we know that what we believe is what we see. What we believe is what we perceive. What our conception of things is what our perception of things is. Yeah, that might work, Larry. I didn't bring any today. But maybe it might help. We'll see. The perception and conception idea is one that I've talked about here before, that what we perceive our world to be is not any objective reality that belongs to all. It is our individualized perception of reality that belongs really pretty much only to us. Because we are seeing the world as we perceive it based on how we believe it to be. So what we need to work backwards through to reverse engineering this thing is to get to our perception and expectancy of good, is to be able to get to the point where we believe it's all good. I once had a friend in the 12-step programs who's now deceased, but he had difficulty getting to the place of saying the word God. It was a problematic word for him, and some of you all may have had that experience as well, and it may kind of, rattle your cage a little bit to hear the word God. But he chose to use the word good instead of God. And I always felt that was a fabulous transformation of that concept, because God is good is God. It's all good, it's all God. That's how we say it here, too. And So to me, it was about good habits are God habits. And to see our good showing up is the habit of seeing God in everything. So I want to talk to you a little bit about, how can you become a mystic in a matter of a couple of months where you can see God in everything? That's the challenge, right? Can we do that? So this idea of habits, there used to be this concept that you had to have 21 days to make a new habit. That got promulgated by a fellow named Maltz, who wrote a book back in the, like 40 years ago called Psycho-Cybernetics, if you've heard about that. So the 21 days became legend or urban legend in our world. And people in the self-help world were always saying it takes 21 days to prosperity. I mean, you're still seeing the 21 days. But now they have studies out where they've done scientific research and indicating that now they've decided it's an average of 66 days to form a new habit. So sorry, guys, it's taking a little longer now. Hey, well, we're living longer, I mean, it all works out maybe. But the idea is that 66 average, when you go back and look at the information in the study, was the average that they took of the people in the study between 18 days to form the new habit and 254. So don't get impatient at 66. You might not be the average person. And we don't really want to be average anyway, do we? Then Malcolm Gladwell came out with his book on the outliers about, almost 10 years ago now, I think it's been, where he preaches the law of 10,000 hours. It takes 10,000 hours to develop mastery in any particular skill. And I'm just going to suggest to you it might take 10,000 hours to develop the mindset, but that would be something like 40 hours a week for 5 years. So I want the 66 days. That looks a lot better now, right? To form a new habit. But it's about practice, practice, practice. That old line about Carnegie Hall, right? So what Ernest has to say in this chapter about his suggestions for the steps to take to get through to this other level of, he says, don't be discouraged if it takes a little time to gain the inner understanding you desire. The time you spend will be more than worthwhile. So he says, your first step is come to a more complete realization of who and what you are. And I would add, not only who you are, but whose you are. Your next step is to enter into a more definite understanding of your relationship with this power. And your third step is, your final step is to use this power for yourself and others. So I'll go back to this again a little more deeply as we move through the morning here. But I had the gift of something falling into my inbox of my email this week. As soon as you set some intention, right, stuff shows up, right? And Jean Houston dropped something in my box this week on habits. So I'll share with you hers and how they kind of correlate with Ernest. So Ernest says, your first step is to come to a more complete realization of who and what you are. Jean Houston's is that you must come into connection with the divine within. Seems like it parallels there. And Ernest says, your next step, enter into a more definite understanding of your relationship with the power of spirit. And she says, pay attention to patterns in your life as they show up. That's your understanding of your relationships, right? Watching for patterns. And Ernest says your final step is to use the power for yourself and others. And Jean says that once you see the deeper story in yourself and others, you come to a place of new creative ways to act, to grace yourself and others. That's the word she uses, grace. So we've had this global heart vision in the science of mind, in the Centers for Spiritual Living now for, 15 years, 2000. I don't know if it's posted anywhere here in the building, but I want to talk now about what I consider to be the most important habit for you to work on, for all of us to work on, as you do your inner evolutionary work, so we can respond to the world differently and begin to see this world that works for everyone. Because the reason it's not there is so we don't see it. We're not choosing to see it. yet, up to now. So we have a number of things that we bandy about, little phrases like Wayne Dyer's phrases of, instead of saying I'll believe it when I see it, saying, well, when I see it, I'll believe it. When I believe it, then I'll see it. Or he says, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. We have ideas around the correlation between cause and effect that isn't necessarily understood by the general population in the world the same way we understand it, where there's this mental part of it that happens before there's this physical manifestation of it, that we cannot change the effect, we can only change the cause that is leading to or forming the effect. Or the word you had, formulated, I didn't hear that in the theme for the month until you said it today, about formulating the world that works for everyone. The famous line that is attributed to Marcel Proust has to do with the idea of that you don't see, the Voyager doesn't discover new landscape, but sees the existing landscape with new eyes. It's actually been shortened from something that's in one of his books called The Prisoner. So we got to get new eyes. The Course in Miracles has a lesson, well, it has a number of lessons about how you use the body's senses. But lesson 270 says, I will not see with the eyes of the body today. We are so busy taking things in, and that perception, conception, believe, perceive is what's functioning and operating for all of us, that when we see with the body's eyes, we're still part of gaining that evidence that supports what we've already decided we believe. So we're going to decide differently. We're going to decide to believe that there is a world that's possible to work for everyone, that there is good, that we are in good already, that it is already good. Ernest says that in here about beseeching the world, crying out to life and beseeching it to be good, has no effect whatsoever upon it. It is already good. Asking it to give you life produces no good results. It has already incarnated itself in you as you, and your inward awareness unifies that conceptualization. This is what's meant by spiritual understanding and realization, is what he says. This global heart vision that I want to read to you to show you how, if I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, but this is the basis behind the idea, if I can get this screen to expand so I can read it, behind the idea of a world that works for everyone as far as the Centers for Spiritual Living is concerned. And what I want you to hear this is how we see. We see the emergence of the global heart to balance and guide the further evolution of humanity. We see a world free of homelessness, violence, war, hunger, separation, and disenfranchisement. Can you see it? Can you begin to see it? We see a world in which there is generous and continuous sharing of heart and resources. We see a world in which forgiveness, whether by heirs, injustice, or debt, is the norm. We see a world in which borders are irrelevant. We see a world which has renewed its emphasis on beauty, nature, and love through a resurgence of creativity, art, and aesthetics. We see a world in which fellowship prospers and connects through the guidance of spiritual wisdom and experience. We see a world in which we live and grow as one human family. Then they begin to talk about how the Spirit Centers for Spiritual Living are a bridge to that world that we see. So what I want to invite you to do in terms of thinking about this world that works for everyone and watching for the good is to see this vision, is to see it with new eyes, is to have this idea that you're not seeing it with the eyes of the body. You're not responding to this negative condition. You got no troubles, as the song started off with today, right? That you got the music in you, and hold that music in you in spite of, despite of, and sometimes because of the conditions, circumstances, and situations you find yourself in. We choose not to see it. And this is not about Pollyanning our way through the world. It is about having a choice in the matter, not about denying the facts. But what we know is that facts are temporary. In this world that we perceive in the 3D concept, it's all temporary. There's nothing eternal about that. The only thing that's permanent and eternal is the internal. It's that soul, that spirit that we are a part of and that is a part of us. Ernest teaches us that there is a power in the world for good, and we can use it. And I subscribe to you that we can allow it to use us. So if we see this, if we listen to Jesus' words about those who have eyes to see, those who have ears to hear, it's not about that physical set of senses that we call vision and hearing. It's about seeing beyond and listening beyond the surface area of things that we can go to and understand that we're in the process of changing how we see it in order to change what it is we see. So the what is what we're transforming here. So back to Ernest's steps again. He talks about in step 1, which is come to a more complete realization of who and what you are. He says you start at once affirming your good, God-given dominion over anything that contradicts the nature of life. Troubles, negative conditions, would that be something that might contradict the true nature of life, which is good? So that you can hold on to that music in you. In the second one, he says your next step is to enter into a more definite understanding of your relationship with this power that is within you. That power is the power of spirit. That power is the power that we know that is us, as us, for us, through us, around us. And that power is magnetic, not dynamic. You know, the ego that we operate out of a good part of the time wants to make things happen. Push, push, push. Make it happen, make it happen. And that's the dynamic power that lies within our being, our personality. But this power that we want to choose to go to as our default after the 66 days or the 10,000 hours of practicing it is the magnetic power, that power that attracts, that brings through us life as it lives itself for and through us. So he says you rearrange your thoughts to conform to the belief that you are one with all of the power and the presence that there is. It's flowing through you as health, happiness, and success. And what he talks about in this chapter is how you have to practice, practice, practice. And what he says about this is interesting to me, and I thought it might be interesting to you too, because it's a little different than the way we normally are hearing it. He says we have to practice the habit of receiving. We often talk about giving as the way for the law of circulation to kickstart itself. But he says we have to practice receiving. He says learn to receive more by daily practicing the presence of abundance, vis-a-vis your good, right? And learn how to use the law of life in a more expansive manner by daily practicing your belief in it. So that's how he suggests that we change, that we turn away from these conditions, that we rearrange our thoughts to conform to a new belief. Get your calendar out. 66 days. You can just, check yourself off and see how well you think you're doing. Take a little inventory at the end of the day. And as he says, be patient with yourself, not hard on yourself. By the way, the people who did the study on that with the 66 days average said that breaking the chain every once in a while didn't really have any significant impact on it. Now, I wouldn't suggest that for those of you in 12 steps who are abstaining from something, but that's part of how you rearrange your habits and your thoughts too. And the third step, which was to use the power for yourself and others, he goes further here to say, bless everything you do. Take the restrictions of your efforts and announce them to be prosperous and good and perfect. And know that this power is flowing through you creatively in the direction which your attention gives it. We talk about attention, intention. I call it attention, intention, no tension. Where you're able to put your attention on something and knowing that what we focus on expands. So that where we have put our intention, to create a new belief system, conform our thoughts to a different belief. If that's our intention, then that's what we're going to have to put our attention on for it to evolve, so that we don't have any tension. We have no tension left around, are we doing it, are we not doing it, is it happening, is it not happening? No stress, okay? Attention and intention produces no tension. So begin where you are right now, he says. Don't wait until you get an understanding as big as a house or as broad as the ocean or as deep as a well. If you've grasped the simple truth that positive statement can neutralize a negative one, then begin by making positive statements in simplicity and in complete faith. The complete faith is what Bonnie talked about when it comes to what is really expectancy of good. It's faith. It's faith. And Ernest talks in here about what I call act as if. He says, if you're faithful in using these few simple methods of procedure, you'll be amazed at the lightning speed, maybe even 21 days instead of 66, with which the power will reveal itself to you. In every way, act as though it were real. Practice the presence of this power until it is real to you, until it is automatic. Don't think you have to put on a long face and imagine that you're like Buddha or Plato. He says, life is enthusiastic joy. It's the music within us. It contains the great song of being. There's nothing little, mean, or petty about it. That's the song of life. He does mention the song of life in here too, Barb, that was in your reading. So he says, go to the joy within. He wants you to pray and meditate, as well as your practice of receiving and practicing your receiving of abundance. You don't drop your practices of prayer and meditation either. And observe what's going on. Pay attention, as Jean said. Pay attention to the patterns. Observe what's showing up, how it's moving through you. He talks about in his suggestion about meditation, enjoy, go within yourself to meet this life and expect it to respond and know that it is going to, and have no anxiety and relax and trust. Believe. Don't deny it. Begin with whatever affirmative and constructive thinking you have and build on that. Refuse to dwell in the darkness of unbelief. Refuse to be overcome by negative suggestions. Boldly step through the place of doubt and plant your feet on the solid rock of faith. I think about Ricky Byers Beckwith's song, Blessed Always, that we just rest in God and say amen. That's enough to take care of meditation almost any day. Just rest in God. And the prayer, Ernest talks about treatment as being our way of recognizing our good. So he says, when you pray or affirm your good, close the door of your consciousness to everything else which may deny that good, and state your needs, not as supplication, but as affirmation of your acceptance of it. Spiritual mind treatment is recognition that our good is at hand, and affirmation that we are now experiencing this good. As he said in the other part, it is real, it is here, it is already good. We shall not gain happiness by continuing to repeat mental patterns of unhappiness. We cannot enter into the joy of living while we remain sad. You cannot change at the level of effect, only at the level of cause. So I submit to you that you might want to buy this book. You might want to read chapter 8. If you talk to me afterwards, give me your email. I'll send you Jean Houston's 3 Habits, because I've got that in PDF. But fundamentally, it's about the practice that it takes to get to the habits. And he says, think these things out carefully with the utmost simplicity until you see that you could not move a finger if it were not for this life and this power within you. Since this is so, you will never cease to exist. You'll always be more and never less. That the recognition of your gift to life will increase with your own livingness of it. So it's about letting the music come through you, right? We will find that every day if we just see it with a different set of eyes. See it with the eyes of the Spirit. See it with the eyes of God. Develop the God habits. See God in everything. Be a mystic in 66 days. Whatever. So I want to close with this little treatment that, and Barbara will do a treatment as well, but this is a practice, actually. He doesn't call it a treatment in here. He says this, the following is a simple practice which may greatly benefit you. So he says about the learning to receive but daily practicing. That's what the continuation of that. That you're practicing a greater expectation, you're believing in more and accepting more. That's the practice of receiving it. Our limitation is based on our unwillingness to receive it. How big is your pipe, you know? Ernest says you can only get 2-inch stream of water through a 2-inch pipe. We got to expand our ability to receive, which means that we have to perceive and believe differently in order to receive differently, right? You're opening every channel of your mind to a larger influx, he says. So this following practice may greatly benefit you. The one supreme power, life, intelligence, and spirit is within, around, and through me. My word is the activity of this infinite mind and is the law of good in my experience. It's perfect in its action and permanent in its manifestation. Infinite intelligence governs, sustains, and animates me. Good alone flows from me, and good alone returns to me. The law of spirit establishes harmony and right adjustment of all personal, family, and business affairs or conditions in my life. No more negative conditions. I'm supplied with every good thing. I'm happy, radiant, and complete. The source of life manifests at peace, harmony, and wholeness in my experience. And everything that I do, say, or think is governed by pure intelligence and inspired by divine wisdom. I'm guided into right action. I'm surrounded with friendship, love, and beauty. Enthusiastic joy, vitality, and inspiration are in everything I do. I represent that life that cannot want. I represent the principle of divine activity, which never tires. I am receptive to the inexhaustible energy of the universe, divine guidance, and to the influx of perfect life, perfect ideas, and complete joy. I accept this word. I know that it is presence, the power, and the activity of God is good in me. I know I'm conscious of the divine guidance of inward peace and poise. And I immediately become conscious. See, that's faster than 66 days. Of divine guidance, of inward peace and poise. I immediately become conscious of a more abundant life. My good. And I expect even greater good, more happiness, and a complete success in every constructive thing which I undertake. And I affirm that this word, being the presence of spirit in me, is the law of God, the law of good, operating through me and establishing in me that which is good and beautiful and true. It is done. I accept, I believe, I know. And so it is.